so time for a little race truck catch up. It's been a couple months since the last video where I talked about sending the injectors off. We've been just idling with the truck, haven't been doing a whole lot with it while we were waiting on those injectors to come back. Dan and those guys got the injectors back to me, got them put in, and like I said in the last video, first step is to pick back up with spool ups and see how it does. I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of cleanliness that the new injectors had. They were a lot cleaner than the old ones. If you actually do the area of a circle math, 5x30, going from a 5x30 to a 5x25 is actually a 45% difference in fuel volume. So quite a bit less fuel, but still enough injector to support about 1,500 horsepower on fuel, which is more than enough for my combination. We've never really made over 1,200 or so. So having the ability to make 1,500 and do it cleanly is perfect. We don't really need any more than that. First thing that I noticed with the new injectors is that I was going to have to add more nitrous during the spool up to make it spool in the same amount of time, which totally fine with that. The goal ultimately with this truck is to run quite a bit of nitrous to try to keep the truck as crystal clean as we possibly can when we get there with it. So the old spool jet setup that I had before, it needed to be stepped up a little bit since we took some fuel away from it. Turbo engine needs fuel to spool, so if you pull some fuel out of it, you've got to replace that with more air, or in this case, air in a bottle. So move the spool jets up, actually running a 40 jet on the first kit that comes on at 1,600 RPM, and then a 44 jet on the second spool kit, which comes on at 2,300 RPM. And I did 3 spool up tests, and by the third one, we had it spooling up really clean and just as fast as it was before, something that was good and raceable, we could go to the track with and keep improving on it from there. So once I had it good and spooling up, I just did some maintenance items to the truck, went over a couple things, put it back on the scales, tweaked with the preload a little bit because it was going a little left on me in Bowling Green. So I wanted to get that corrected and going straight, and was kind of waiting on the weather to break a little bit. We had a string of really hot days during the Shied Diesel extravaganza. It was ridiculously hot over here in the Midwest. So I wanted to wait until the weather cooled down a little bit to make testing a little bit more enjoyable. When you're trying to make as many laps as you can when you're testing, when the weather's cooler, it makes it a lot easier to get the truck turned around. So seen a break in the weather coming up, and we loaded the truck up to take it to Edgewater this past Thursday for a little test and tune action. And my plan was on the first run, I was just gonna do a planned shut off. So I was gonna run it about 100 feet, plan on running it to the 1-2 shift, and then check the data. Make sure the EGT looked good, AFR was okay, make sure that there wasn't any signs of any problems. Since switching to a new injector, kind of totally changing everything, so you need to make sure that you're not gonna go out there and burn something up. The temperature outside is about 76 degrees, so it was a really nice day, but it was really humid. It was kind of trying to rain on and off all day. So I just left the spool up kind of alone where it was. When the weather conditions change, you've constantly got to be chasing that moving target with your nitrous, with your bottle pressure. If you've got that thing spooling up perfect, super fast, when it's 85, 90 degrees out, when it gets 75 degrees, that thing's gonna backfire. So you need to take jet away from it. You need to take a little bit of bottle pressure away from it. You need to do something to tame the nitrous down just a little bit. I had it spooling up decent at the house, but it wasn't anything to where I felt like it was going to pop or backfire. So I just put the bottle pressure a little bit conservatively, around 875. I'm usually shooting for 900, 925. Just so that way I know that with the high humidity in the air that it wouldn't go out there and backfire. So we go up and do the burnout as always, and I noticed that it's a little slow to spool in the burnout. which didn't totally catch me off guard because the way that I do the burnout procedure, I have full throttle travel. And so when you have full throttle travel, it's easier to overfuel it. And so I just assumed that with me not being in the truck for a couple months, haven't done a burnout in a while, I was a little rusty. And so it was a little bit slow to spool because I was overfueling it a little bit. But got it up on boost, did the burnout, went up there, backed up, my normal procedure. Everything seemed normal. Oil pressure was good. I always look at oil pressure when I stop to back up and just make sure that oil pressure is in check. And then usually that's about the last time that I'll check stuff like that. When you're getting ready to stage one of these things, you're not scanning all of your gauges like you think you would be. You're focusing on getting the thing staged right. If you're actually racing it, you're focusing on nailing the tree. So always do an oil pressure check before I back up, and everything was cherry. So take this starting line, turn my first bulb on, and I start to spool it up, and instantly it seemed like it was heavily overfueling. Usually I can just barely touch the throttle and it'll go from idle to 1400 RPM like almost instantly. It'll just kind of rev up like that. And it didn't really do that this time. It seemed like it was laboring a little bit. It just seemed like I was overfueling it. So I backed off thinking that it was just me being rusty, not, spooling up here with my race shoes on. You'd be surprised if you go and spool one of these things up with flip-flops on and then you put a set of boots on. It's very drastically different. So I just thought, maybe, I'm just a little rusty at it. So eased off and just barely brought the throttle in, and it was still slow to spool. And I thought, well, maybe I used, maybe bottle pressure is too low. Maybe I used, quite a bit of bottle pressure during the burnout. So maybe it's just going to be a little bit slow to spool. But in hindsight, that should have had nothing to do with the low RPM because the first spool jet doesn't come on until 1600 RPM anyways. So does finally get to my first kit, turns on, gets pretty much right up to the second kit, and it starts climbing, building boost just like it should. Everything seemed completely cherry and normal from there. So I rolled it in, set the trans brake. I'll always on a test and tune night when it's not a pro tree, I'll roll it in a little early before it's all the way up on boost, because if I wait till it's fully up on boost and then I stage it, then I'm gonna have to wait for the tree to drop, and I don't like sitting on the converter any longer than I absolutely have to. So roll it in, wait for the boost to be exactly where I want it to be. As soon as I seen 20 PSI on the dash, I let off the button. Initial move, I felt the truck took off, felt good. Drove a little bit to the left. After looking at the videos, it looked like it actually had a little bit of wheel speed, so it might have had a little bit too much power in it for that particular track conditions for just a test and tune night. But nothing crazy, nothing that needed to abort, just had to give it a little bit of right wheel input. And about 30 foot out, when it was really starting to pull, it felt like, that's when all hell broke loose. And I heard a noise that I had never heard before, but I instantly knew, somehow, that it was a rod. Right around that 30-40 foot mark, it stops pulling and it started nosing over, and at the exact time it started nosing over, I heard a noise that I hadn't heard before, and for some reason my brain just knew that was a rod noise, and I reached up and I pulled the fuel shut off immediately and killed the engine. And you could hear in the video there, when I kill the motor, when it's coasting, you can hear the grrr. It started smoking a little bit, so I hopped out real quick just to make sure that it wasn't on fire. Luckily, everything was good. And more importantly for the racetrack, the diaper did its job. We didn't put any oil down on the racetrack. So if you guys are not running diapers in your competition vehicles, do your local racetrack a favor, put a diaper on that thing, because they absolutely do work. My buddy Newman came up and I told him, I said, hey man, I think it's a rod. He looked through the wheel well and said, yep, sure enough, it was a rod. And there's about a quarter size hole in the block. So we're not 100% sure yet what happened, why it happened, but we do know a few things. We have some theories, but I don't want to go into them yet until I start taking it apart to kind of know exactly what happens. I don't want to just speculate. But what we do know is they said that during the burnout that they saw quite a bit of white smoke out of the catch can. It's normal for the catch can to haze a little bit, especially when it's really humid outside. But they said that they saw more than a normal amount of smoke. And then as you see in the video there, right when it let go or right before it let go, sometime around there, quite a bit of smoke comes out of the back of the cab, that white smoke. And that's where the catch can is back there. So not exactly sure what happened yet. Don't know if it broke a rod bolt. Don't know if, we hurt a piston or something, but we'll get it apart and we'll get that figured out. But what we do know is that it being hard to spool, looking back on it with hindsight, that should have been a telltale sign that something was wrong. Like I said, I thought that it was just the temperature that day. I thought maybe it was a bottle pressure. I just thought maybe it was a couple things. I thought it was me, driver error, just being rusty, not being in the truck for a while. But whatever the problem was before the rod actually broke. So we don't need to necessarily figure out why the rod broke. We need to figure out what caused the rod to break. Haven't tore into it at all yet. That'll be a totally separate video. Don't 100% have a direction of what we're going to do yet. We have some things in the works, some stuff that we're talking about, but I'm not done, not giving up. Luckily towards the end of the year anyways, so we have the rest of the year and all winter to figure something out. And honestly, I'm not on any crunch timeline. I don't have any sponsors that I have to appease by being at such and such race or anything like that. So we'll put something together on our timeline that makes sense, that ultimately is better than what we had before. I just don't know exactly yet what that is. I can tell you that we're not going common rail. This truck, it is the fossil for a reason. It is an old dinosaur. It will always be an old dinosaur. I have a soft spot for 12 valves. This truck will always be a 12 valve as long as it has a diesel engine in it. So unfortunately, not the kind of video that I wanted to put out to you guys. I really wish that this was more of a clickbait type video, but it's not. We really did chuck a rod out of it. We really did hurt the motor pretty bad. And so we're going to spend next couple weeks getting a game plan together, getting this one apart, see how bad it is. I'm hoping that it's a block, a rod, a crank, and my guess is probably a set of pistons. I'm hoping that that's the extent of the damage. I'm hoping that I can reuse my cam. Hopefully it didn't get into that. Luckily, I shut it down right away, and we weren't, 6,000 RPM going through the traps when it happened. So hopefully anything that can be salvageable will be, but we won't know until the next video when we get into tearing this thing apart. So like always, guys, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you guys coming along with this journey with me. It sucks. Like I said, this ain't the video that I want to put out there, but we're not done. We will get back after it. And when we're building this new engine, that's just a bunch of videos that we can do about, putting engines together and bring you guys along for the ride and get your guys' input along the way. And so, I'd like to think that all things happen for a reason. I'm not sure yet what the reason is for this one, but I know that it is what it is, and we will continue on. So If you guys are new here, click that subscribe button, hit the like button. That helps me get the video out to more people, and stick around because we're not done and we got a lot of race truck stuff coming up in the future. Thanks, guys.